Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio recording of the weekly Shema Yisrael newsletter titled, For You Are Dust. Well, this was originally sent out as a newsletter on day 13 of month 6 on the Creator's calendar, also known as September 6, 2025 on the Roman calendar. Since there are new people subscribing and reading this newsletter every week, I like to review things like time and the calendar. And with the recent change in Roman months from August to September, it's a good opportunity to show people the reality of the matrix we all find ourselves in. Last month was the 8th month on the Roman calendar, and it was named after the first Roman emperor known as Augustus, whose name was also Octavian, which means 8, and therefore that's why they placed the month of August where it is in the 8th position. The 8th month on the Roman calendar actually reminds us of new beginnings as the Roman Republic transitioned into the Roman Empire under Augustus. And there's a lot for us to learn looking at the history of the Roman Empire versus actually what's going on in the United States of America today. Well, that's for another discussion, and I think I mentioned that in past newsletters. We're presently in the month of September, the 9th month, but September literally means the 7th month. Sept, the Latin root sept, means 7. So what gives? Are we going backwards in time? Well, obviously the answer is no, but this numbering discrepancy actually points to a more ancient calendar utilized by the Romans that only had 10 months, beginning with March, the month associated with the god Mars. And while most of us grew up under this Roman system of time, thinking that time is fixed and constant, I suspect the majority would be surprised to know how much man has meddled with the reckoning of time. Spanning all the way back to ancient Mesopotamian culture, we see different calendars from different peoples and civilizations, and most of them are connected to the worship of the hosts of heaven. Indeed, we still utilize the sexagesimal system developed by the Sumerians that fragments an hour into 60 minutes, each consisting of 60 seconds. Of course, that's an artificial reckoning of time. The only way you're ever going to tell time in that fashion is if you have a device that actually fragments time in the same way. So we have stopwatches and our watches that we have on our phones and things of that sort. They fragment time in such fashion, but that's an artificial reckoning of time, and that's something that I've discussed in various books and articles over the years. Well, clearly great effort has been exerted to distract us from the truth. Of course, if a culture is dominated by spiritual entities in opposition to the Creator, it only makes sense that they would distort time and distract people from living in synchronicity with Yahuwah Elohim. Well, if you're reading this on the Roman calendar day demarcated as September 6th, 2025, then you're actually on day 13 of month 6, according to the one who created time, among other things. And I'm actually recording this the following day on September 7th, 2025, which would be day 14 of month 6, and so on. And if you ever want to know what time it is on a Creator's calendar, any particular day or month or year, you can go to www.torahcalendar.com. And they have calendars up there for free, and you can just check what time it is according to the Gregorian date. Well, the vast majority of the population on Earth is obviously oblivious to that fact of what time it is according to the Creator's calendar. Indeed, most don't even think about time or the fact that there are various methods of marking time. Well, the Creator tells us how He reckons time from the beginning. In Genesis 1:14-19, it says, Then Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and moedim, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. Then Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and a lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Elohim set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Well, the Hebrew word moedim, as you saw it was inserted up there, is often translated as seasons. And if you're reading a typical English translation of the Bible, you'll read seasons, where it would be moedim in Hebrew. But if you wanted to actually translate that Hebrew word moedim into English, it would be better and more accurately defined as appointed times. And a single appointed time, that's plural. Moedim is plural, and the singular is moed. That would refer to an individual appointed time. Well, did you know that the numerical value of moed is 120? The mem equals 40, the vav equals 6, ayin equals 70, and dalet equals 4. And that'll become significant when we consider the fact that the one who created time also scheduled specific times to reveal his plan for creation. That being the case, if you desire to keep those appointments, then you should understand how he keeps time. Well, several weeks ago we talked about the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, with the enlarged bet. And here I show an ancient Hebrew, a Paleo-Hebrew symbol of the bet. It's very different from the modern Hebrew, the Chaldean flame letters. Some people refer to the modern Hebrew. Well, the emphasis, because of the enlarged bet, was on a house from the very beginning of the Torah. And the first 7 words essentially described the scope of creation that would extend from the heavens to the earth. They would contain the building blocks for the house and determine who would dwell in the house. So that's the context of the scriptures that we have. And unless you read them with that understanding, you may find yourself going off on all sorts of tangents. Well, the 7 words were also, they also provide us with a boundary, a limitation for the time that the subsequent text described. Indeed, the number 7 was established as a boundary for time. After the description of the circuit of a day, we're provided with a cycle of 7 that culminates in a day of rest, a day to stop, reflect on the past week of creation, and look forward to the next week. Of course, this was not the only instance when we read about a limitation involving time. Prior to the flood, we read about Yahuwah placing a limitation on flesh. In Genesis 6:3 we read, "And Yahuwah said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 shana, or years." Well, now that's interesting. There's that number again. 120 is associated with a moed, as we saw, which is an appointment based upon time. Now we see 120 years as a limit for flesh. Well, I grew up hearing preachers tell how the length of a man would be limited from that time forward to a maximum of 120 years, but that simply was not the case when we examine genealogies in the scriptures. For instance, Abraham later lived to be 175 years old. Well, the word often translated as years is shana in Hebrew, and shana has many different meanings, and while it can refer to a year, it can also apply to any circuit or a cycle. There are different instances in the scriptures when it refers to repeating, recurring, returning, or doing again. So we can see why it would refer to a year, the cycle of a year. But I believe that the year being referred to is a Jubilee year that consists of a 50-year cycle. That would mean that Yahuwah would no longer strive with his creation. The flesh of mankind would be limited to 6,000 years, or that's 120 times 120 cycles times 50 Jubilee years. That would give us 6,000 years. That's just my opinion, but it seems to fit the patterns that we have in the scriptures. And if you add to that a 1,000-year rest period, we can see the limitation of 7 hinted to at the beginning, leading to a renewed heaven and earth. So you see, we see the 7 millennium there now. that would kind of expand from those first 7 words to the first 7 days being a week, and now we have a limitation for this present creation that we have here. Of course, as we've been speaking about the Exodus over the past weeks and even months, the covenant at Sinai, the number 120, should also make us think of Moses, the mediator of the covenant, who lived to be 120 years old. Now, these connections simply cannot be coincidences. We're supposed to see the patterns and remember that his life was fragmented into 3 40-year periods. Well, we're currently in the third 40-day period that he spent on the mountain. Again, remember, he was up there for 120 days, 3 different times, 3 different periods of 40. And we're currently in the third 40-day period that he spent on the mountain renewing the covenant with Yisrael. At that time, he was also transitioning between his second and third 40-year period of his life. It was a significant event and a pivotal time that's supposed to really grab our attention. Well, I try to mention this every year because the pattern is so important that it bears repeating. Moses ascended the mountain for the third 40-day period on day 1 of month 6. That year there were 30 days in month 6, so it was 40 days prior to Yom Kippur, which lands on day 10 of month 7. So can you see the significance of that final 40-day period that consisted of 120 days total on the mountain mediating the covenant? Moses descended with the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur, a day traditionally connected with finality and judgment, but here we see renewal of the covenant also associated with that. And what would have happened if the covenant wasn't renewed by that moed? Well, that's the question that everyone must ask as we look forward to the approaching Yom Kippur on October 3rd, 2025. And it's worth noting that really in Hebrew it's Yom HaKippurim. It's the Day of Atonements. We commonly just use Yom Kippur, but in the Hebrew it's Yom HaKippurim, and it's various atonements going on there. So there's a hint that it required more than what was just happening in the temple when the temple was in existence. So we've got this day approaching on October 3rd, 2025. It is a moed, and it's a significant time. And we recognize that that's the day that Moses descended the mountain with the renewed tablets. And so we should be looking at that date as a significant time for renewal of a covenant. And everybody needs to be asking, do you have a mediator? If so, who is your mediator? And is he qualified to renew the covenant? Because that's our focus. Are you relying on a covenant renewed by the blood of the Lamb of Elohim? If not, then you're in a broken covenant and you've got a problem. Of course, the number 40 is also intimately connected with a generation. Even after the covenant was renewed through Moses, the generation that left Egypt was prohibited from entering the covenant land. They continued to fail the tests. They were unable to inherit the promises given to Abraham, and we see all this tying back to Yahuwah, who is the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And of course, you should question, why associate 3 different generations with Yahuwah? And I've discussed this in various books. The reason that Yahuwah is identified with these 3 generations is because it was through these 3 generations that the covenant was fully revealed. Remember, Abram was an uncircumcised Mesopotamian raised in the middle of a pagan culture. He was called out and brought into a land defiled by the Canaanites, where he later entered into a covenant with Elohim while in an uncircumcised state. He was later circumcised when he was 99 years old, and his promised seed then passed through the cutting of his circumcised organ. Isaac, the son of promise, was later born, and he was the first covenant son to be circumcised on the 8th day. His seed later passed through the 8th day cutting, which resulted in Jacob. Jacob then passed through the 8th-day cutting of Isaac and was thereafter circumcised on the 8th day. So the foundation of the covenant pattern was complete and fulfilled through these 3 generations. And as a side note, the Hebrew word for covenant is brit, and it literally means to cut a covenant. And if you, just as a side note as well, if you look at Brit and then Bereshit, the first word of the scriptures, you can see that Brit surrounds the word Bereshit with ish, fire. Esh means fire, is in the middle of Brit. So it's highly profound to look at the Hebrew and see the message that was actually transmitted just from the very character, the bet, the enlarged bet, and the very word Bereshit, which contains so much in it. Well, Jacob grew up and returned to the place where Abram began his journey in Mesopotamia. After marrying and raising a family in Mesopotamia, he then crossed over like his grandfather. He also received a name change like Abraham did, and he then retraced the covenant path, thus fulfilling the pattern of the covenant. When Jacob, later known as Israel or Yisrael, returned to the land, he had a much better understanding of Elohim than Abraham likely did, or Abram, when he originally crossed over. And there's a deep lesson in those 3 generations as they all grew in their relationship with Yahweh and continued the pattern of the covenant. Well, we have the benefit of hindsight, and that's why we all need new names when we are finally called out of exile and allowed to return to the covenant home, and we read about that in the text of Revelation. We're no longer looking for Jewish people to force their way into the covenant land without the Messiah. This is all a false return and a disaster for Christians who support such a deception. And I talk about that in my my most recent book, the Israel Dilemma. Instead, we're waiting to be called back according to the only covenant that was renewed by a qualified mediator. We're waiting for King Yeshua, who is the only one capable of opening the seals and claiming title to the land. And that's why it's so important that we read the scriptures in context so we can see the patterns and learn from them. Failure to do so leads many astray and on a path of destruction. And that brings up an interesting point regarding how we read and understand the scriptures. It's important to realize that the scriptures we refer to as the Bible were not lost texts that were discovered in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia or some other ancient lost civilization. They weren't recently discovered under dirt, dust, and sand, written in cuneiform on mud-baked tablets. Our scriptures were written long after that time on animal skins and parchment. Unlike us, the people we read about in the Torah were very familiar with the various traditions, myths, and beliefs that derived from Mesopotamia. The patriarchs came out of that culture, which was essentially a mystery to most people until recently, when they found all these cuneiform tablets and then were able to actually translate them. So to us, what is very sort of recent finding to the people in the scriptures was not at all. It wasn't not a mystery. Amazingly, though, the recent discoveries in textual translations from ancient Mesopotamia are now being treated as new discoveries in our day, and people are making wild claims and pursuing crazy theories because of their ignorance. And we've all been ignorant because essentially that civilization was lost in many respects until all of the recent discoveries that have been made over the last century or so. Many fail to recognize that our scriptures already dealt with these ancient cultures. In fact, they were specifically provided to people who were very familiar with ancient Mesopotamia. Again, that's why Abram was specifically called out of that culture. So the scriptures that we use as the guide on our covenant journey must be read and understood from that perspective. They were provided to a people immersed in religious traditions that trace back to Babylon, Babylonian sun worship, a people familiar with Mesopotamian religion, which looked to the hosts of heaven as the gods. Indeed, that's specifically why the sun and the moon were not named in the prior verses quoted concerning time in Genesis 1. While most readers think nothing of that fact, it would jump right off the page to the person reading the text thousands of years ago. Two great lights, the great light and the lesser light? What's up with that? The ancients in and around pagan cultures knew that the great light that we commonly call the sun was the god Utu, or Shamash in Akkadian, and the lesser light that we commonly call the moon was the god Nana, or Sin in Akkadian. In fact, to this day, the word for sun in Hebrew is Shemesh, and so it comes from Shamash. And so again, these were named after pagan deities, and the picture there shows the different symbols of the sun, the moon, and then Venus on the right. And that's taken from ancient Mesopotamian carvings. Well, by not naming the lights and indicating that the Elohim of Yisrael created these unnamed lights was revolutionary. It was a direct affront to the Mesopotamian beliefs and was a religious reset, so to speak. It was intentional and specific, but most people miss it because if you just read it in English, you don't even understand what's going on behind the scenes here, and by not reading them in their proper cultural context. Unless we understand the purpose of the scriptures given through Moses for a people called to be set apart, it's easy to get distracted and even deceived. And that's why I write these messages and books. We don't have the same culture or understanding of history as our ancient predecessors. In fact, in many books I talk about how we in the West, we actually think differently than those in the East. We simply don't think. Our minds don't work the same as theirs do. And that's easily provable, and many people have written books on that subject alone. As a result, we need to remove the filters that we have and try to view the text from the proper perspective. It's not always easy. Well, earlier on Shabbat, I had the pleasure of briefly joining a conference call with some brethren who have decided to read and study the 12th book in the Walk in the Light series, titled The Final Shofar. And that book was the culmination of 15 years worth of research, and I tried to place many scriptural issues into their proper context. It was the final book in the series and specifically intended to recalibrate a person's perspective so that they could view biblical texts and prophecies within their proper historical context and scriptural context. And I hope the book accomplishes that goal for those who read it. It's a big book, but regardless, it's really just scratching the surface, and it's important that we question all of the assumptions that we've inherited through religion. I can speak to some of the vain traditions and lies that I inherited, but I don't specifically know what you have been taught throughout your life. It's certainly a journey, and I'm thankful every day that Yahuwah has graciously allowed me more time to get it straight. While I've learned a lot through the years, one thing that has become abundantly clear is just how little I know. There's so much to learn and so much to study. It's really a humbling experience. If you don't agree, try taking a stroll through the British Museum in London, and you'll quickly get overwhelmed by all of the information. Well, we'll be visiting the Cairo Museum in Egypt during the Passover tour, and even that museum, which focuses on one particular history and culture, is too much to take in during a single visit. Again, it's a humbling experience to recognize how much information we don't know and how much confusion still exists within an arguably small space and time when compared to the vastness of the universe. Well, thankfully, Yahuwah is not so much concerned about the knowledge stuffed into our brains as he is with the purity of our hearts, and that was a message that I sent out a couple weeks ago. Create in me a pure heart. What amazes me the most is when I see people who become arrogant because they feel they have mastered a particular language or skill. Our world tends to breed arrogance through knowledge, but when you're considering the creator of the universe and his ways, the more you learn, the more you realize how deficient you are in your walk and your knowledge of Elohim. And that's why we so desperately need the Son to mediate on our behalf. And of course, that's a message that we were presented from the very beginning, a house bait for the Son bar through a covenant, Berit, Bereshit. Again, there's that word, Bereshit, and you can see the when you look at the last word, Bereshit, the Bet Resh, and we're looking from right to left, the Bet Resh, bar, and then Esh, Aleph Shin in the middle there, and then the last two characters are Yud Ta, and so you see you have Berit on the outside of Esh, fire, and we could go on all day with the different messages that are in that word alone, the first word in the scriptures. Well, remember the first 7 words that we previously discussed. Again, they were written long after the creation events they were describing. They were written centuries after the Sumerians had established vast civilizations throughout Mesopotamia. They were meant to set the record straight. Creation was limited to 6 days and culminated with the creation of man. In the beginning, it was not the Sumerian creator god Enki or the Akkadian god Ea who created. In fact, it is not until all of creation is summarized that the name of the true creator of everything is actually used. Genesis 2:4-5, we read, "This is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahuwah Elohim made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the field was in the earth and before any herb of the field had grown." So this identification of the Creator is then followed by an interesting passage. "For Yahuwah Elohim had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground." Well, the mention of no rain and no man at that point is intentional, particularly the fact that man was not tilling the ground from the beginning. You see, unlike Sumerian traditions and culture, that was not his original purpose. Man's function was originally not simply to grow food so that he could feed himself and his family. This is a very important point to understand. The scriptures then proceed to describe man and his intended purpose. It says, "And Yahuwah Elohim formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." And we've discussed that in a prior newsletter a few weeks ago. Yahuwah Elohim planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground Yahuwah Elohim made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 riverheads. The name of the first was Pishon. It is the one which skirts the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bedulium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one which goes around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Hiddekel. It is the one which goes toward the east of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. Then Yahuwah Elohim took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden and to tend and keep it. And Yahuwah Elohim commanded the man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." Well, last week we focused on humility, and the creation of man was specifically intended to remind us of that vital and necessary characteristic. Yahuwah could have made man from stars, the rays of the sun, gold flakes, or diamonds. You name it. Yahuwah could have made man from the most spectacular ingredients of the universe. In fact, he even mentions various treasures and gems and precious metals, where they can be found. So obviously they existed, but he could have made man from anything Instead, what did he use? Dust. Well, now there are some humble beginnings for sure. And it's interesting that Yahuwah even made a point to mention where he did all the creating, established his headquarters in Eden, and then planted a garden. You need to understand that the text is describing a kingdom. Eden was his kingdom, and that is what kings do when they're done building and going to war. They plant gardens. A king plants a garden when all his enemies are subdued and defeated, and he is at peace. Well, interesting, Yahuwah did it all smack dab in the middle of Mesopotamia. And now we know the Euphrates River and the Tigris River is often associated with the river Hiddekel that we read about above. We don't know exactly where the Gihon and Pishon rivers are, but archaeologist Joel Kramer believes that he has found the remnants of the Pishon River. In fact, Joel Kramer, he's got a lot of very interesting videos on YouTube, and he is somebody who I'd like to try to hook up with when we do the Jordan leg of our trip, our upcoming Passover trip. So we're going to see if we can maybe coordinate that. But we'll be seeing some of the sites that he has shown. He lives in Jordan, and he's really done some great work over there in Jordan and Israel, actually locating some really cool locations. Well, in any case, it's clear that Yahuwah established his kingdom in Mesopotamia. Again, it was very specific and intentional. In case there was any question of whether Yahuwah was inferior or even equal to the Sumerian gods, the matter was settled. He was there first. He created and controlled it all, and that is why the Tower of Babel was constructed there, as mankind rebelled against the king and his kingdom. They stormed the castle, so to speak, and tried to dethrone the king. Well, in response, we know, and we'll probably talk about the Tower of Babel in future episodes, because it's really critical, and I mentioned it in many of my books. It's one of the pivotal events, and that's why it was mentioned in the scriptures. Well, the rebellion began in that region, and that's why Yahuwah specifically called a man out of that space to be his agent, in order to establish a covenant and a people who would be gathered and restored from all the rebellious nations that were divided and scattered. Interestingly, there was good gold there, like I say, but Yahuwah specifically did not use gold to fashion a man. Again, he opted for dust. And here's that creation passage again from the Transparent English Bible written by James D. Tabor. It says, "And Yahuwah Elohim shaped the soil creature, dust from the soil, and he blew into his two nostrils breath of life, and the soil creature became a living life breather." Well, this version provides a very mechanical translation of the Hebrew text. That's why it's called a transparent translation. I appreciate the use of soil creature to describe the man, and what makes the ingredient so intriguing is due to the fact that the man was made in the image of Elohim. Genesis 1:26, it says, "And Elohim said, let us make soil creature in our image, according to our likeness. Let them govern in the fish of the sea, and with the flyer of the skies, and in the animals, and in all the land, and in everything that moves about upon the land." Again, that's also from the Transparent translation. So a creature that is made in the image of the great Creator is formed from the most basic of ingredients. We may delve into that further in the future, but for the purpose of this discussion, I wanted to focus specifically on the process that we read about, and contrast that depiction of the creation of man with the Mesopotamian practice of creating an idol or an image of God. We read there were specific rituals for the consecration of a cultic image, a statue formed from a wood core encased in gold and or silver, decorated with inlaid precious stones and dressed in robes. They involved the washing of the mouth, mispi, and I think it's Akkadian, on the first day to cleanse the statue of all traces of human contamination in the production of the idol, and the opening of the mouth performed with syrup, ghee, cedar, and cypress on the second to bring it to life. Sacraments which may be related to the Pit Uzni ear opening ceremony. On this day, be present for this statue which stands before you, ceremoniously grant him the destiny that his mouth may eat, that his ears might hear. And so these various rituals facilitated the idol taking on the persona of the deity, awakening the supernatural force within it and enabling it to see, act, eat, and drink the offerings and smell the incense. And they would say in Akkadian, this statute cannot smell incense without the opening of the mouth ceremony. It cannot eat food or drink water. So that's a process that they would go through, and of course it would vary in different cultures, but it gives you an idea of what man would do to create an image of a god. So the Mesopotamian religion incorporated a process where certain priests or craftsmen could fashion an image of a god, cover it with gold, and dress it up, and after the awakening ceremonies, the god would enter into the image and be present in and through the image with the ability to function. Now, it's the opposite of the creation account provided to the children of Israel, who were explicitly instructed not to repeat those Mesopotamian practices. In fact, they were warned through the first 2 of the 10 words. And that's how specific Yahweh was in focusing on the pagan practices that derived from ancient Mesopotamia, where men created images of gods and worshipped them. And this is actually what the Israelites were doing when they constructed the golden calf. They were following this Sumerian tradition of making an image of their god. And in that case, their god was allegedly Yahweh. Now again, when considering context, it's important to remember that the text of Genesis 2 concerning the creation of man was given to Moses while he was up on the mountain. The children of Israel did not hear those words of creation until after their sin of making an image of Yahweh. Well, that's no excuse. The point was made abundantly clear when Yahweh spoke directly from the mountain. Yahweh even reiterated that at the 11th commandment when he spoke to Moses. You shall not make anything to me, to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. Essentially, don't try to make an image of me out of gold and silver like the idol worshippers. I'm the one who made man in my own image, and I made him out of dust. And one final thing, you're going to return to dust. All of the language used to describe the creation of man was purposeful and intentional. And while the focus appears to be on the ingredients, it is also important to point out that the term made from dust could be viewed as an idiom. After the creation of man, the next time we read about the man's origins is when we read about his fate after the fall. It says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Well, you can interpret this literally, that his body came from dust and will literally, ultimately, return to dust. There is a deeper lesson to be found. When man was created, he was given the breath of life, as were other living, breathing beings. The big difference was his design, his purpose, and location. He was placed in a garden and given access to the tree of life. There's no indication that he was granted immortality, although that's a point that can be argued. If he were designed perfectly and existed without sin, then possibly that was Yahweh's intent. But clearly there was a need to remain in the garden close to the tree of life, which was mentioned 3 times in the beginning. Genesis 2:9, 3:22, and 3:24. Access to the tree of life is important, and that's why we hope to regain access to that tree in the New Jerusalem. By no coincidence, the tree of life is also mentioned 3 times at the end of the book in the text of Revelation. That's Revelation 2:7, 22:2, and 22:14. So we can see the tree of life actually kind of creating a parenthesis around this entire story in the scriptures. Now remember that there was originally no man to till the garden because Yahweh himself planted the garden. Food was readily available and in abundance for the man while he remained in the garden. Only after the act of disobedience was man punished by being evicted and forced to till the ground for food. So the soil creature had to work the soil for his food. He was demoted from royalty. He was fired from his position, ejected from the house, and forced to become a farmer working with his hands. Well, that was a humbling experience for sure, and one of the lessons that we're supposed to learn concerning disobedience. Aside from his demotion, he was also reminded that because of the separation from the tree of life, he was now destined to return to dust because he was mortal. So as we continue to count the days to the appointed times of the 7th month, it's important to remember the boundaries established by Yahuwah through time and the rehearsals of the appointed times. We must view the scriptures in their proper context, and we must learn the lesson of obedience and humility through each moed. You do this by remembering your place as a soil creature made in the image of the all-powerful Elohim, and never forgetting that you are dust. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett from ShemaYisrael.net, and at the end of the this particular newsletter, I mentioned that we have a new way to donate. It's kind of a quick and easy way for people to donate if they feel led to do it. If you find value in these messages, it takes time to research them, write them, and then print them and send them out and all that. And we do a lot more than these weekly newsletters. Of course, the books. I'm in the process of actually writing a book on Islam at this point, so that we Christians can understand what Islam is, and that Muslims themselves can actually understand some of the problems with their religion. And we're going to try to point them to the true Messiah, the true Yeshua, and the true covenant path. So this provides a nice way for you to donate if you feel led to do it. It's on the barcode here. I also want to announce that our Egypt to Sinai to Jordan tour, this is going to be an incredible tour that you can read about here, and you can also follow the link if you want to find out more information or sign up. I've got a QR code right here. And this is going to be at Passover. We're actually going to do a Passover on the Creator's calendar in Goshen, in the land of Egypt, and do about as close of a rehearsal as can be done and maybe has ever been done, honestly. And then from there, we're going to go to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, and then we're going to then end up in Jordan and seeing a bunch of the sites there, and concluding at the Jordan River in the ancient land of Moab, and where we'll immerse there. And it's going to be a powerful and exciting trip. So if you want to join us, find out more about it, use that QR code right there. And if you've got this, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, if you're just listening to this but you don't get the written version, you can follow this link, this QR code, to sign up. Or you can just go to our website, www.shemayisrael.com. That's YISRAEL.net. You can sign up there. So, or if you just got this, forwarded to you from somebody else, that's a way to do it as well. So, hope you enjoyed this message, and we look forward to you, joining our community and signing up for other messages. And, that's it for today. And we look forward to our next message next week. My name is Todd Bennett. Shalom.